Well, as we continue on in our worship today, we are finishing up our series that we've been in called All Aboard. You may recall that we've been having some fun talking about the ships of our faith. So week one, Pastor Mandy talked about fellowship with God, right? That in order to continue to grow with God, we need to be anchored lest we drift away. Just 2 weeks ago, Pastor Paul spoke to us about membership, and that to be a part of the body means we all have this unique place, this unique space that we occupy. Just last week, Pastor Caleb spoke to us about discipleship, right? Making sure that we get the right things in the right places, that as we follow after Jesus, that we are pouring into others and that others are pouring in to us. And today we're going to continue with our final ship. We're going to talk about leadership, which may not fit into those same categories that we've been talking about, right? When I think of leadership, maybe you do too, I think about bosses, I think about people at work, I think about corporate job pyramids, right? Maybe something like this is what comes to mind when you think of leadership, right? Moving up the ladder. And I don't know about you, but in some ways it feels counterintuitive to talk about leadership through the lens of faith, right? Are you with me? After all, I remember just last week, Pastor Caleb talked about Jesus flipping over tables of people who are conducting business in the temple, right? And leadership feels a little bit too close to that conversation today, doesn't it? But is it actually, right? As we drill down into it, shouldn't our faith inform and even define what leadership looks like, specifically for ourselves as Christ followers, but maybe even more and beyond that, right? For instance, let's talk about Joe, right? Joe leads a team at a bank, and he does his best to manage his staff according to the model that he sees laid out in Jesus' teaching. This is an easy one, right? Do you all think Joe is a leader? Absolutely, right? Does the Bible have something to say about Joe's leadership? 100%. So what about Suzanne? Suzanne is a nurse who's caring for patients, right? She's navigating doctor's orders and the care orders from the support team while also balancing the work demands and taking the time to actually listen to and care for her patient. Is she a leader? I would say absolutely she is, the way that she manages herself and her team and those relationships, right? How about Mike? Mike is in waste management, right? He works just for a company. He's not a manager, not a leader per se. No one reports to him, but as he works, he encourages his coworkers, right? That their value is more than what they do, simply picking up garbage, but in who they are and the attitude that they bring along. So is Mike a leader even among his coworkers? Absolutely he is. Now, how about Chris? Chris is a stay-at-home parent managing a household of 4, laundry, chores, homework, sports schedules, dinner plans, social calendars. Are they a leader in their family? You better believe that they are. All of this is to say that leadership is so much more than the power that we often reduce it to. It's so much deeper than those corporate pictures and things that we get, the job pyramids, the accolades, the answering who's in charge. At its simplest definition, I'd use something that John Maxwell, who's a leadership guru, here's what he would say. He would say leadership is influence. Right? Full stop. Nothing more, nothing less. Leadership is about influence, the way that we use the influence we have on the people around us. And in each of those examples and in your own life, I would say influence is something that we all have. Now, there may be different degrees and different relationships that we have, though. Certainly, our influence isn't the same in every circle, but we all have some measure of influence with the people around us, those that we interact with on a regular basis. So if leadership is influence, that's something that we all have to one degree or another. What does the Bible have to say about how we utilize that influence, how to steward it, how to manage it, how to make it look more like Jesus and less like perhaps the common thought processes of leadership that we so often encounter? Because we've all seen leaders, or we've heard stories, or worse, we've been directly impacted by leaders who are just a little bit off course, right? Leaders who use their influence negatively, whether it's for personal gain or selfish motivation, or they use their leadership to create a toxic environment using guilt or shame or manipulation. And too often, those who pursue leadership find themselves doing more harm than good. Anytime we talk about leadership, we have to recognize that sometimes in pursuit of our leadership, we trade off more than it's worth. And we often don't realize that trade-off until it's too late. Now, you might be comforted to know that we're in good company because even the disciples lived this way. The people who lived in close proximity to Jesus, who had Jesus as their model and the example of their faith and leadership journey, they struggled with these thoughts around leadership as well. We're going to jump into the Bible today in Mark chapter 10. Mark chapter 10, it's on page 607 if you want to use one of the warehouse Bibles. If you didn't bring a Bible, you can slip your hand up. Our ushers would love to bring you one. If you don't own a Bible, just keep it. It's our gift to you, but we'll be on page 607. And just as you're turning there, to set the scene, the disciples are walking with Jesus. And they, like us, are living with the tensions of leadership, of how to use influence well, but a few of them also see this pyramid of success, right? They see a way to advance that Jesus might be able to help them climb the rungs of influence a little bit faster. Let's pick up the story in verse 35. It says, "Then James and John, the sons of Zebedee, came over and spoke to him. 'Teacher,' they said, 'we want you to do us a favor.' 'What's your request?' he asked. They replied, 'When you sit on your glorious throne, we want to sit in places of honor next to you, one on your right and the other on your left.'" All right, now what's happening here? Sitting on the right and the left of the person who is in charge is a model of leadership. It's a model of authority. And so James and John know that Jesus is going to be a bigwig when it comes to eternity. Jesus, right, like the boss, the CEO, except of like all heaven and all time and all eternity. And the disciples go, we could be VPs in heaven. Right? Like if we play our cards right, we could be the C-suite executives in Jesus' kingdom. We could move up the corporate ladder into the seats that we so rightly deserve, right? Anyone ever had that thought, that opportunity, that feeling, right? To shoot your shot. Maybe you have lunch with the CEO and you're going, if I could just let him see how great of a leader I am. Maybe you share an elevator with a manager and you're like, this is my shot to be able to show them my leadership prowess, this idea that I've had, and you take that opportunity. Maybe it worked out for you. Maybe it didn't. We've all seen the movies or had the opportunities for those key conversations to play out where just one conversation, right? Just one right word at the right moment could alter the trajectory of our life, and we'd be catapulted into the upper echelons where the power and the wealth and the money and where we belong. Now, there's nothing wrong with shooting your shot, don't get me wrong, but the thinking behind it is a little bit questionable, right? Because when we buy into this myth that we're just one conversation away from climbing the ladder, or worse, when it's not a myth, when it's actually the reality, we buy into the lie that leadership is all about position. That all that matters when it comes to leadership, to being a leader, is our position on the org chart. Our place in that corporate ladder, the seat that we sit in, the salary that we get paid, the influence that we exert on those around us. And while that is one example of leadership, it is certainly not the whole picture. Again, leadership is so much more than simply the power that we so often reduce it or equate it to. Leadership is absolutely in those circles, right? It's absolutely influenced through the corporate pyramid and the ladder and perhaps through power, but more than anything, what we see in the scriptures is that isn't the whole story. It isn't the whole picture of leadership. But sometimes we get stuck there. We think that the point of leadership is to move up the ladder, up the pyramid, but it isn't. Leadership is fundamentally about people. About influence exerted over and through relationships with those that we are doing life with. And we see this, right? Jesus is going to invite James and John, the people who just had the request, he's going to invite them into a deeper picture of leadership in the next couple verses. Let's pick it up, verse 38. But Jesus said to them, "You don't know what you are asking. Are you able to drink from the bitter cup of suffering I am about to drink? Are you able to be baptized with the baptism of suffering that I must be baptized with?" All right, now pause here, right? Jesus is being sarcastic, right? He doesn't want an actual answer, right? He's trying to show them the absurdity of their question, right? That they don't know what they're asking because they've reduced this leadership into a pyramid chart. They've lost the greater context that the authority and leadership and power, that while it may be expressed through those seats of being on the right and left, but their leadership is rooted in their character and their competence and the way that they care for people more than any chart or seat could express. So he asked them a ridiculous question to help them figure that out. Right? Can you do what I can do? Right? Like, honestly, could you do what I'm modeling for you? Right? Because they just came up to Jesus and asked for a favor in eternity. And Jesus says, look, you're crazy. You can't drink the bitter cup of suffering and the baptism of suffering that I'm going through. Right? Jesus is laying it on pretty thick here. Right? What's the right answer? No. Of course we can't do what Jesus is going to do. We're not God. Not to mention that at this point, right, Jesus is living out a perfect life in front of James and John, right? He's got to be like, bro, you can't even do what I'm doing right now, right? Let alone what I'm about to do. Sit down and shut up. Jesus wouldn't say shut up, but I can, right? Do you think that they got that message, right? Did you read ahead? Or maybe you just know the story, right? What do James and John have to say to this question from Jesus? Verse 39. Oh, yes, they replied, we are able. Is that not the stupidest thing you've ever heard? But hold on, let's not just remove ourselves from the story, because chances are, maybe a time or two, you've felt the same way. Right? For instance, how many of you think that you could do your boss's job better? Don't raise your hand, right? Not only could you do it, but you could probably do it a little bit better than they're doing it, right? And you might even be right in that assessment, right? The issue becomes the character, the attitude that we bring along with it, because we may see what our leaders do on the surface, but we don't know what they bear behind the scenes. Chances are we don't have the framework to understand what goes on behind the scenes day in and day out that our leaders, managers, bosses might have to shepherd and steward. Okay, now bosses in the room. If you have employees or you are a supervisor, has anyone ever told you that they think they could do your job better than you? Right? Again, no hands, just reflect quietly. And maybe they were right? But there were also times where, be honest, you'd just stifle a laugh, right? Like, you think you could handle my job, my responsibilities? God bless you, but you have no clue what you're talking about when it comes to the job that you think you can do. Because leadership in any sphere is far deeper than simply what stays on the surface. But just like James and John, we think we're equipped to handle it. We think we're ready. Put me in, coach. Just like when we put up the corporate pyramid, many of us think that we belong further up on that ladder. I should have more responsibility. I know more than those guys. The problem is that if we only see the chart and perhaps the salary that goes with it, but we aren't equipped for the leadership lessons that it takes to lead at those levels. All right, to be a manager, you have to be ready to fire people. And sometimes you have to be ready to fire people because you did a bad job leading them. Is that a cup that you feel like you can drink from? To be the VP, you're in charge of an entire department and revenue streams, and if you fail in one of those areas, it could cost 10 to hundreds of people's jobs, affect their lives, their families. The decisions that you make affect others. Can you be baptized with that weight of suffering on your shoulders? Now, the boss, the CEO, right, the corner office, you have to make decisions that might cause your company to close its doors, costing every single person their jobs, benefits, income, and even if you don't shut down, you might be losing market share, having to downsize, and that means a lot of hard decisions. Why do I say all of this? Because no matter where you're at in your leadership journey, leadership takes humility. It takes humility, whether it's the humility to submit to those in authority over us, that maybe they know better, maybe they actually know what they're doing, or maybe they're doing things and responsibilities that I don't understand at all, or to believe the best about them, that they're doing all that they can. But it also takes humility to be the person on top, to be the person in charge, to be where the buck stops, as it were, and where hard decisions need to be made. See, it's easy to want our place on the pyramid to advance and to move up, but when we actually think about the weight of those, to drink the suffering that goes along with it, it's a difficult question. Because we all give a lot of grief, right, to the people who are higher up on the pyramid, right? The salaries as you go up the pyramid, but do we actually understand the weight that comes with those positions and responsibilities? Because James and John clearly didn't, right? And they made a fool of themselves, but it's okay. Sometimes we do too. Sometimes we think we know what we're talking about. Our boss, coworkers, our spouse, our friends might say the same thing to you that Jesus would from 2,000 years ago. You don't know what you're saying. So what do we do with this leadership? Right, this powerfully, relationally driven force that we put and map out on org charts and performance plans that we try to identify and grow in so that we get rewarded, but often we just have only a partial view of it. Jesus would again invite us into a deeper view of our leadership, one formed by him, authored and modeled by him conveniently too. He would challenge us to not to avoid leadership in this world, but to take, instead of the upward mobility of climbing the corporate ladder, to instead flip it on its head. Let's keep reading Mark chapter 10, verse 42. It says, Jesus called them together, all of the disciples at this point. He says, you know that the rulers in this world lord it over their people, and officials flaunt their authority over those under them. But among you, it will be different. Whoever wants to be a leader among you must be your servant, and whoever wants to be the first must be the slave of everyone else. For even the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve others, and to give his life as a ransom for many. Jesus says, look, I get it. I've seen the org charts, the development plans. I see how leaders treat leadership development, how they use their seats of power, sometimes incorrectly and inappropriately, to take advantage of others. I get that picture of leadership. He says, but with you, with my followers, with you, my disciples, the people who are following after me, it's going to be different. Now, small aside here, right? You get the sense that Jesus knows what's coming. Right, that he's addressing his team, the people that he's grooming to storm the gates of hell with him, right? We rag on the disciples a lot, right? Because their story's been written down for over 2,000 years, and we dissect everything that they say at every turn. But as a small reminder, Jesus chose them. He believed in them. You can feel him addressing them here as his chosen ones. These are his teammates, his comrades, the people that he believes in. He says, no, it's going to be different with you. Because if you want to be the leader, you be the servant. If you think you belong at the top of the org chart, serve at the bottom. If you think you're the best, put your shoulder into lifting others up, not just yourself. Which sounds completely counterintuitive, right? It's upside down and backwards, right? We live in a dog-eat-dog world, eye for an eye culture, where we do whatever it takes to get ahead, and if that means throwing someone under the bus so that I get the promotion that I deserve, then so be it, right? I got to watch out for number one after all, and often the leadership that is modeled for us perpetuates and solidifies these values that we then put into practice and emulate in ourselves. But Jesus here plays the ultimate trump card by using himself as the example. He says, look, I'm in front of you right now. And I'm not behaving like the leaders you've seen. I'm showing you a new version, a new definition of leadership. I'm coming to you as a servant. I'm not seeking anything for myself. I'm coming to you as a sacrifice. I'm drinking the cup of suffering. I'm not passing the buck or the blame. I'm in front of you as your teacher, your Lord, your rabbi, and I'm serving you right now, even up till and through death. And I'm wanting you, Jesus says, to see this better picture of what leadership can actually look like. I want you to notice about this passage, there's no parable here, right? There's no hidden teaching, right? Jesus appears to be driving his message home. John, who is in this story, would later include this same idea in the Last Supper, right? When Jesus washes the disciples' feet, it may not seem like leadership, but he uses the same strong, direct language in John chapter 13. It says, after washing their feet, he, Jesus, put on his robe again and sat down and asked, do you understand what I was doing? You call me teacher and Lord, and you're right because that's what I am. And since I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you ought to wash each other's feet. Listen, I've given you an example to follow. Do as I have done to you. I tell you the truth, slaves are not greater than their master, nor is the messenger more important than the one who sends the message. Now that you know these things, God will bless you for doing them. Same voice, same similar thought patterns. It's a lesson that Jesus probably told, or at least we see he told multiple times in multiple spheres. It's like he wanted us to understand this deeper, better, more full picture of leadership. So what do we take away from these scriptures about Jesus and about his leadership, and what can we glean? A couple of thoughts briefly from the text. Number one, not all leadership is good leadership. And all God's people said, duh, right? Not rocket science, right? We've all had bad leaders. We've served under bad leaders. You might have been a bad leader at one point. Hopefully you're still not. But bad leadership has been all over modeled for us on the stage and on TV, right? We could come up with a working definition. These are individuals who abuse power, who misuse authority. They're untrustworthy, manipulative. They're people whose character is far less developed than the position that they occupy. Jesus acknowledges that there are bad leaders. In Mark 10, verse 42, he says, you know that the rulers in this world lord it over people, and officials flaunt their authority over those under them. This is the model of bad leadership that Jesus gives to us, which tells us that the opposite is also true, that there's a right way to lead. There's a right way to carry this mantle of influence that doesn't lead to marginalize people, but to actually bring people up, to help them along. There's a better way to lead, a trustworthy opportunity to influence others. And this is difficult because so many of the models that we see about bad leadership, about abuses of power, mismanagement, and poor character, those are the deep, dark stories that appear to everybody on the internet, right? There's mass clickability when we tell the bad stories. See, I think good leadership isn't more rare. It's just less flashy. It's not that it's not out there. It's not that good leadership is even harder to find. It just doesn't seek the attention for itself. It doesn't garner the clicks on the internet that bad leadership does. Because good leadership isn't arrogant. It's not proud or boastful, right? It's a quiet resolve to do the right thing, which is the invitation that Jesus invites his disciples and us to do, that there's a better way to lead. And that's point two, right? Leadership under Jesus' authority looks different. Mark 10, verse 43. But among you it will be different. Whoever wants to be a leader among you must be your servant, and whoever wants to be the first among you must be the slave of everyone else. Right? Now, on the surface, in the parable of leadership that our corporate structures present us, this seems backwards, right? After all, we climb up in power and influence as our leadership increases, and so do the benefits that affords us, right? The top of the pyramid seems to be the place of least servitude and most freedom. I think that the reality, though, for anybody who's walked that journey is actually far more difficult. And I don't tell this as just an anecdote, and I think this is true. This comes from a little bit of experience. 5 years ago, I left Ransom Church to be the lead pastor of a church in Colorado. Right? I was the CEO. I was the chairman of the board. I had the position, the power, and the title, and all of the freedom that entailed, right? Except that I also had the burden. I led our organization through an incredibly difficult transition. Of 18 staff, we transitioned literally all but one of them during my time there. We navigated a pandemic as a church and an early age learning center. We attempted to figure out how to best care for families and employees and for people who we could no longer afford to pay their wages. I had people tell me how terrible I was because of the decisions that I had to make as the person at the top of the pyramid. More than one time, I got accused of not even being a Christian. So can I be honest? Didn't feel free at the top. It felt like I was the only person who cared at all for the weight of the entire pyramid. It's like the pyramid was upside down, and it was balanced precariously on the tip of the iceberg, which happened to be my shoulders. And instead of reigning on high as the boss, the CEO, the one in power, it felt like the whole thing was balancing, that it was precarious, that it was on my shoulders, that one misstep, one lapse in leadership or judgment, and the whole thing could come tumbling down. Which, by the way, represented people and families and relationships that I loved and valued and would protect more than anything. And this wasn't, I don't believe, because I'm a pastor. I don't even think it's because I'm a Christian. I think that it's the true cost of leadership. Once we feel the impact and the weight of our decisions and how they impact everyone else around us, this is the true reality. And this isn't just for corporate structures and pyramids. This is for the stay-at-home parents. This is for the individual contributors. All of us feel this weight as we shoulder the mantle of leadership. And Jesus says, look, don't buy the outside pictures of leadership that the Pharisees and other people are presenting you. Your leadership will look different because you will experience good leadership, and you will do so from a place of care and concern for the individuals that you have the privilege to lead, because the reality is that the leader is the servant and is subject to the entirety of the organization. Whether you're a good or a bad leader, the result of being a leader is that you become the servant of all. I think this is true for Jesus. Clearly, it's true for pastors, but I think it's true for CEOs and presidents and politicians and really any place that these leadership structures exist. That the power and accolades that we seek and desire, they come with an added responsibility of care and concern. And the stories that we hear are the ones where that gap is most evident, because this is a fundamental principle of leadership, that the leader is the chief servant in the organization. And you may say this morning, well, it's a good Bible story, right? It's not true of my boss. It's not where I go to work. It's not true of my employer. It's not the people that I know. They're all bad leaders. All they care about is the bottom line. They don't care about the people or how they get there, and I hope that's not true. But it might be. That might be your reality. But I see, as I survey the workforce ahead of me, that even leadership in the secular workplace are coming to term with Jesus' lessons. See, good leadership, even in the secular world, is beginning to follow biblical principles. See, thought leaders like Adam Grant and Simon Sinek, Malcolm Gladwell, Robert Greenleaf, they're all well-known leaders in thought for corporate structures and enterprise and leadership. None of them are overtly Christian that I'm aware of, but they're writing books with titles like Leaders Eat Last and concepts that match up with biblical principles. They're writing books like Start With Why and Give and Take that challenge the existing leadership structures to embrace a more servant leader-focused approach. That the best way to lead isn't through might and power and a firm hand. It's a quiet resolve to care for people, to steward an organization well. In other words, to be the type of leader that Jesus calls us to be. More than anything, leadership is a function of people being together, right? And someone takes charge, leads the way, makes sure everyone is doing things that benefit the group. Leadership is the way in which people are influenced by others to do things that matter, not only individually, but as a whole, as a unit working together. And the best example of leadership that we have in the 21st century also just so happens to be a first century rabbi, and those things are inclined to tell the same stories no matter where you fall at on your reading. Who'd have thought that? See, leadership in and of itself isn't good or bad. People are in process, and they may not be leading from the correct place, position, or expectation, but hopefully they're learning. The good news is that as Christ followers, I think we have an inside lane. Because chances are, if you're a good Christ follower, you'll be a good leader. Because they grow from the same tree. Caring for people, stewarding what's been given to us well, wanting more for people than from them, than from their position, to be the best possible leaders we can be, whether you serve in a kingdom-minded organization or not. So, leaders in the room. My challenge for you is to recognize your God-given call, right? That the pursuit of Jesus may put you on a different path than the pyramid of success, but that the path of Jesus equips you with all you need to be the best possible leader in eternity and out. Others of you might be saying, I don't know that this message is for me. I'm no leader, right? I've got no position of influence, nor do I want one, right? I just want to do my thing, right? I'm just a solo contributor. I'm an entrepreneur. I'm a nurse. I'm a stay-at-home parent. And my challenge to you would be this. I want you to rethink your leadership paradigm. Because you may say, I'm not a leader when it comes to the pyramid. And I would say, good. That's okay. You don't have to be. But no matter where you're at, whether you put yourself on a pyramid of success or not, you have influence. You have people gathered around you, right? More than likely, it's people that you serve with, whether it's at home or at work or in living relationships. You have influence in your circle of friends, whether you're the extrovert or not. You have influence in your home and in your family and your significant relationships. And even if you feel like you're all alone, like there's no one else with you, I'd remind you that no person is an island and that all of us are connected in one way or another. It's why you're here listening to my voice right now. But beyond that, whether you believe me or not, that you have influence and that influence is all you need to be a good leader and that you can be a good one because you're a Christ follower, you should believe Jesus. Because Jesus chose James and John. And they were so out of touch that they thought they were the best of the best, that they could handle the same things that Jesus could. And Jesus used them as a model for centuries as to how leadership actually works. And that same Jesus calls and invites you and I to the same path, to the same road of servitude. And at the end of that road is the same promise, that the greatest in the kingdom of heaven is the servant of all. And nothing is stopping any one of us from doing that.
Jesus turns our leadership models on their heads. And he models that in his leadership and in the way he asks us to follow him and lead in his name. Nowhere is that more clear than in communion. The story Will just shared about washing feet, about being servants. In that same gathering, Jesus gives his followers some instructions about communion. He says, my body is this bread broken for you. My blood is this wine poured out for the forgiveness of sin. And he instructs us as his followers to do this in remembrance of him. So today, as we sink into the upside down calling of Jesus on our lives, we celebrate that calling corporately with communion. So as we remember today, go ahead and grab your bread and juice and imagine being a disciple in the same room with Jesus. You struck up a conversation on the way to supper, probably shared some jokes and maybe even shared the challenges you were facing in the day. You get there and he washes your feet, humbly showing his love and care for you. He assumes the role of a servant, showing how we are to be towards others. But that was just the beginning. What they did next during the meal was probably the most confusing thing that Jesus did. But in light of knowing of Jesus' death and resurrection, we get to understand how his love was even greater than what we could comprehend. So go ahead and grab your bread and remember how Jesus took the bread. He broke it, saying, this is my body broken for you. Eat this in remembrance of me, in remembrance of what I did for you and for all those around you. He then took the cup, he raised it, saying, this is my blood, which confirms the covenant made between God and his people. It makes this covenant of forgiveness, of sacrifice, it makes it complete. It is poured out as a sacrifice to forgive the sins of many. Take and drink. Would you pray with me? Jesus, we thank you that we can remember your sacrifice. And and how important that is for us to understand. I thank you for the leadership that you have shown us, on how you've completely flipped it upside down to what our culture knows today, on how we are to be servants. Help us to model how you served us on a sacrificial level. Help us to be more loving towards others and to give our lives so that we can help others know you. God, we love you. It's in your name we pray. Amen. May you take that with you this week and continually remember what Jesus did for us and how he gave his all for us. That completely shifts our mindset of what leadership means.